They showed up at my job on a Tuesday. My sister and my mom, standing in the lobby of my office building like they had every right to be there. Like they hadn't spent the last 3 weeks pretending I didn't exist. My coworker Patrice came to find me at my desk and said, "There are 2 women downstairs asking for you. They seem upset." That was the moment I knew stopping the rent payments wasn't going to be the end of it. It was only the beginning. Let me back up. My name is Joelle. I'm 31 years old, and for 4 years, I paid my sister's rent. Not because she asked nicely. Not because we had some formal agreement. Because my mom cried on the phone one night and said my sister Dara was going to lose her apartment. And what kind of family lets that happen? I was 27. I had just gotten my first real salary job, project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company, $54,000 a year. Decent benefits, nothing glamorous. I was proud of it. I was finally getting somewhere. I said yes, 1 month, just to help her get back on her feet. 1 month became 4 years and 2 months. Dara is 35. She has a daughter, my niece Poppy, who is 7 now and the sweetest kid you've ever met in your life. Dara and Poppy's dad split up when Poppy was 2. He pays child support, not much, but something. Dara works part-time at a nail salon, cash under the table. Says she can't do full-time because of Poppy's school schedule and her anxiety and a dozen other reasons that change depending on the conversation. I never pushed back on any of it. I told myself it wasn't my place. Her rent was $1,150 a month. For the first year, I Venmo'd it to her and she paid the landlord directly. Then her landlord started calling me. She'd been pocketing part of the money and paying late, running up fees. So I started paying the landlord directly, $1,150 every first of the month for 3 more years. That's over $40,000. I did the math last November when I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store and couldn't make myself go in because I was buying store-brand everything and skipping my own dentist appointments, and I needed to understand where my money was actually going. $41,400. I never told anyone that number out loud until now. My mom knew I was helping Dara. She didn't know the amount. Or maybe she did and just never asked, because asking would have required her to acknowledge what was happening. My mom is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. But she has spent her entire adult life smoothing things over, and she is so good at it that she can make a crisis disappear by simply not looking at it directly. Dara was always the one who needed more. Dara was always the sensitive one, the struggling one, the one who had it harder. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one who could handle things. I handled things all right. Last October, I had a car repair that wiped out my emergency fund. My alternator went, then my water pump. $1,200 I didn't have sitting around anymore because I was sending $1,200 to my sister's landlord every month. I put it on my credit card. I told myself I'd pay it off in 2 months. I didn't. Then in December, my building raised my rent by $175. I started doing this thing where I'd open my banking app and then immediately close it without looking at the balances. That's not a sign of a person who is okay. The dinner happened in January. My mom does a Sunday dinner every few weeks at her house. It's not optional. You show up, you bring something, you sit around the table and pretend everything is fine. My mom made pot roast. My Aunt Claudette was there. Dara was there with Poppy. My cousin Weston was there too, which I always find exhausting because Weston has strong opinions about everything and the volume to match. I had brought a bottle of wine and a salad, which I'd spent more time on than I should have given that it was a Tuesday paycheck week, and I was watching every dollar. I sat down and Poppy immediately climbed into my lap, which was the best part of the whole night. We were about halfway through dinner when my mom mentioned that Dara was thinking about getting a car. Nothing fancy, she said, just something reliable used so Dara could maybe look for better work, expand her options. Weston started asking questions about what kind of car, what the budget was. I stayed quiet. I was cutting my pot roast. Then Dara said casually, like she was commenting on the weather, "I was actually thinking Joel could help with the payments for a while, just until I get more hours." The table didn't go silent exactly, but there was a shift. I looked up. I said, "I'm already covering your rent, Dara." She looked at me. not with embarrassment, not with apology. And she said, "Yeah, but you're not really doing that much else, are you? You don't have kids. You don't have a mortgage. You've got the flexibility." Flexibility? Like the last 4 years of my life were just extra room in a bag she could keep stuffing things into. My mom said, "Girls," in that tone she uses, the one that means, "Please don't make this a thing at the dinner table." My Aunt Claudette looked at her wine glass. Weston actually laughed a little, which I will not forgive him for any time soon. I didn't say anything else that night. I helped clear the dishes. I kissed Poppy on the top of her head. I drove home with the windows down even though it was 38 degrees because I needed air. I needed to feel something other than what I was feeling, which was a particular kind of humiliation that only comes from being talked about like you're a resource instead of a person. I called my best friend Tamsin when I got home. I told her what happened, word for word. Tamsin is the kind of person who listens completely before she says anything. When I finished, she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Joelle, what are you going to do? I didn't know yet." I sat with it for 2 weeks. I thought about calling Dara and having a conversation. I drafted it in my head 20 times. I thought about talking to my mom first. I thought about just continuing, just absorbing it. That's what the responsible one does, right? She absorbs it and moves on and doesn't make things harder for everyone else. But something had shifted. I couldn't unhear the way Dara had said it. "You're not really doing that much else." She didn't say it with cruelty. That almost would have been easier to process. She said it like it was obvious, like my life was just a long stretch of easy, unearned comfort, like she had done me a favor by letting me contribute to hers. On February 1st, I did not pay the landlord. I'd notified him a week before, politely, professionally. I told him I had been covering the rent as a personal arrangement with my sister and that I would no longer be able to continue. I gave him her contact information for future billing. He was not happy, but he was not my problem. My legal obligation to him was zero. My name was never on that lease. I didn't tell Dara. I didn't tell my mom. I found out later that Dara didn't have the rent. She'd apparently been expecting my payment like clockwork and had made no contingency plan whatsoever. By February 7th, she was calling my mom in a panic. By February 9th, my mom was calling me. I let it go to voicemail the first 2 times. The third time I picked up. My mom's voice was tight in a way I'd only heard a few times in my life. She said the landlord had called Dara about non-payment and that Dara was beside herself. She said, "I don't know what's going on with you, but you can't just stop without any warning." I said I gave her 4 years, Mom. She said, "That's not the point." I said, "Then what is the point?" She didn't answer that. She said Dara had Poppy to think about. Said this wasn't just about the 2 of us. Said we needed to be a family. I told her I agreed, and that being a family meant everyone pulling their weight, and that I was not in a position to keep doing what I'd been doing. I told her I'd been skipping my own doctor's appointments to keep that rent paid. I told her about the credit card debt. I told her the number, the $41,000. And she went very quiet. Then she said, "I didn't realize it had gotten that bad." I believed her. I also realized in that moment that she had never asked. Not once in 4 years had she asked me how I was managing or whether this was sustainable. She had accepted my help on Dara's behalf without ever looking at what it was costing me. I said, "I know you didn't, but now you do." We hung up without resolution. My mom sounded sad. I felt sad too, actually. I loved her. I just didn't know how to keep doing this. What I didn't expect was what happened next. The following week, Dara called me 47 times in 3 days. I am not rounding up. I went back and counted later when I was looking at my phone log for a reason I'll explain in a minute. I didn't answer most of them. When I finally did, she screamed at me, told me I'd ruined her life, that I was a selfish, heartless person, that she'd been counting on me, that I had some kind of obligation to her because she was family. I said, as calmly as I could, that I had fulfilled more than any obligation required of me, and that I wished her well, and I ended the call. 2 days after that, I got a notification from my bank. Someone had applied for a credit card in my name. I want you to sit with that for a second, because when I saw it, I couldn't process it. I stared at the notification on my phone screen for probably a full minute, just thinking, that's a mistake. That has to be a mistake. There's no way. I called the bank immediately. The application had been submitted online. The personal information used matched mine, my social security number, my date of birth, my address. The application had been declined because my credit utilization was too high, which is the only reason I found out about it at all. I called the fraud department. I filed a report. I placed a freeze on my credit at all 3 bureaus that same afternoon. Then I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. I didn't know for certain it was Dara. I want to be honest about that. I didn't have proof in that moment, but I had a list of people who had access to my personal information, people I'd shared it with over the years for various reasons, people who'd seen documents, people who'd been in my apartment, and that list was very short. Dara had been in my apartment dozens of times. She'd borrowed my laptop twice that I could specifically remember. I keep important documents in a folder on my desk, things like my insurance cards and lease and social security card copy. I'm not careless about it, but I'd never had any reason to be guarded with her. I called Tamsin. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer I found was a woman named... I'll just call her my attorney because she asked me not to use her name in any public setting, and I respect that. She was practical and calm, and she did not make me feel stupid for having been in this situation. She helped me understand my options. We filed a police report for identity theft. We sent a cease and desist letter to Dara's address. Not confrontational, just clear. I was aware of what had happened. I had documentation, and any further contact that was harassing in nature would be addressed legally. The 47 calls stopped. My mom called once more after she heard about the police report. She didn't scream. She sounded exhausted. She said, "Did you really have to go that far?" I said, "Mom, someone tried to open a credit card in my name." She said, "You don't know it was Dara." I said, "No, but the police will figure that out." She asked me not to destroy the family over money. I told her I hadn't destroyed anything. I told her I'd been the one holding things together for 4 years and that I needed her to see that. She cried. I cried too, quietly, after we hung up. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists, the way I do when I'm overwhelmed and need to come back to my body. Here's the part I wasn't expecting. I started sleeping better. Not immediately. The first week after everything happened, I was anxious and barely eating. But something about having taken the steps, the police report, the attorney, the credit freeze, the cease and desist, something about having done the real, concrete, actual things instead of just absorbing more and more and more. I felt less like I was drowning. I started tracking my finances seriously for the first time in years. Mint, a spreadsheet, a notebook, all 3, because I needed to see it from every angle. I had $4,200 in credit card debt. My savings were at $800, which is almost nothing. But I was also making $54,000 a year with full benefits, and without that $1,150 going out every month, I had room. Real room. For the first time since I was 27, I paid off the credit card by May. By August, I had $6,000 in savings. I also started therapy, which I know sounds like a footnote, but is not. My therapist, I'll call her Dr. P, has a calm, methodical way of asking questions that makes me feel like I'm piecing something together rather than being interrogated. She helped me see some things I hadn't been able to see clearly before, mainly about the role I'd accepted in my family and why I'd accepted it and what it had cost me beyond money. We talked a lot about the concept of a family system, how families assign roles without discussion, without consent, and how those roles calcify over time until you can't remember not having them. I was the responsible one so early that no one, including me, ever questioned whether I wanted to be. The identity theft investigation took several months. I won't go into every detail because my attorney advised me to keep some of it private, but I can tell you that there was enough evidence to pursue the matter, and that it was pursued. I won't say what happened to Dara because I genuinely don't know how that chapter ends yet. What I can say is that the investigation confirmed what I suspected. My mom and I didn't speak for about 3 months. That was the hardest part of all of this, honestly. My mom is not the villain of this story. She is someone who loved her children the best way she knew how and created, without meaning to, a dynamic where one of them was expected to carry what the other couldn't. I hold her accountable for that, and I also hold her love for me as something real and separate from her failures. Those two things can both be true. We started talking again around April. Slowly. She called to ask how I was doing, and I answered, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, and it felt like a small, careful beginning. She hasn't apologized in so many words, but she brought me food one Saturday. A casserole left on my doorstep with a note that said, "I love you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it." And I stood in my kitchen holding that dish for a long time. Poppy sends me drawings through my mom sometimes. Colored pencil pictures of cats and horses and a purple house that I think might be mine. I miss her. I'm still figuring out what that relationship looks like going forward. How to love my niece without it serving as a doorway back into a dynamic I can't afford to re-enter. That's still a work in progress. I moved in March. I found a one-bedroom in a different part of the city, a little more than I was paying before, but worth every dollar. It has a clawfoot tub and big windows and a community garden in the courtyard that I'm planning to actually use this summer. I signed the lease and handed over the security deposit and stood in the empty apartment that evening, alone, and it felt like the first space I'd ever had that was entirely mine. Not responsible one mine. Not responsible one mine. Just mine. I've never told this story out loud before. Not all of it. Not in order. Even Tamsin doesn't know some of these details. The floor sitting, the banking app I kept closing without looking, the way I used to rehearse cheerful phone calls with my mom to make sure I never sounded like I was struggling. I'm telling it now because I think there are other people living inside a role their family gave them who have forgotten they can put it down, who have been told in 100 small and unspoken ways that their ease is an offense to someone else's difficulty, who have quietly funded someone else's life while their own sat waiting. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to stop even when stopping creates problems you didn't create. You are allowed to stop and then deal with what comes next and get through it and come out somewhere on the other side where you can breathe. I'm still getting there. Some days are harder. Some days I open my banking app and see a balance that's actually growing, and I feel something so unfamiliar it takes me a second to recognize it. It's security. I think that's what that is. And it turns out that's not flexible. It's not a bonus. It's not something left over for people who have it easier. It was mine the whole time. I just had to stop giving it away. I've been thinking a lot about cause and effect. Not in some abstract way, in the very specific, very unglamorous way that plays out inside a family kitchen, around a dinner table, over pot roast that somebody else brought the wine for. What I know now is this. Every dynamic has a starting point. Someone, at some point, said yes when they should have said, "Let me think about it." Someone absorbed the first uncomfortable thing, and then the second, and then the third, until absorbing became the only language they knew how to speak. I was that person for a long time. I said yes in my late 20s because I loved my family, and I thought that's what love looked like. Showing up, filling in the gaps, being the one who could handle it. What I didn't understand then is that love without a boundary doesn't teach anyone anything. It just funds the problem. Dara didn't become someone who could casually say, "You're not really doing that much else," in a room full of people because she's a bad person at her core. She became that person because no one ever let her feel the full weight of her own choices. I was part of that system. Every payment I made without a conversation, every month I let slide without asking what her actual plan was, every time I told myself it wasn't my place to push, I was participating in something that wasn't helping either of us. I thought I was being generous. I was actually just keeping things comfortable enough that nothing ever had to change. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not what Dara did, not even what my mom didn't notice, but what I had done, consistently, with good intentions, for 4 years. The intelligence part, the part I'm still working on, is learning to ask harder questions earlier. Not cruel questions, just honest ones. Is this helping? Or is this just easier than the conversation we need to have? Am I giving because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? Those are uncomfortable things to ask yourself when the answer implicates you. But they matter. They matter more than being the person everyone can count on, because being counted on and being taken for granted look identical from the outside until one day they don't. The hardest thing I've done in the past year isn't filing the police report, or sending the cease and desist, or sitting across from my attorney and explaining what I suspected my own sister had done. The hardest thing was calling my mom back after she cried and not reversing everything just to make the discomfort stop. That's where the real work happened. Right there, in that silence on the phone, choosing not to fix something I hadn't broken. What I want anyone to take from this, if there's anything worth taking, is that stopping is not the same as failing. Walking away from something that was slowly taking everything from you is not a moral failing. It is actually the most honest thing you can do. For yourself, yes, but also for the people who need to learn that you are not the floor they can stand on indefinitely without ever looking down. Joelle is okay now. I'm saving money. I have a clawfoot tub and big windows and a community garden. I'm going to use this summer whether I'm ready or not. My mom left a casserole on my doorstep. Poppy still sends drawings. Some things broke, some things didn't. And the ones that didn't break, I'm finding out, were the ones worth keeping all along.